Hi there everyone, welcome. My name is Katrina Schilling and I am the naturopath at Woodmark Health based in South Australia. Today I'm extremely honoured and very excited to be interviewing one of my favourite women's health and fertility advocates and educators, Jessie Brebner from Fertility Charting. Jessie is a wealth of knowledge to begin with. She is a certified Symptothermal method instructor. She is the creator and developer of some beautiful hard copy fertility charting journals that those using fertility awareness-based methods can use to chart their cycles. She also offers some fantastic services and has developed some really wonderful educational courses that teach people about fertility awareness-based methods, and what that means for their fertility and their reproductive health and their health in general. So I'm very excited to be interviewing her today, and hopefully some of the questions and answers will be shedding a light on some of the queries that you have around fertility awareness-based methods. So let's get started. Welcome, Jessie. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Katrina. It's so exciting to be here.
So the first question that I have, Jessie, is basically what is a certified symptothermal method instructor? What does that mean, and how did you get into that position, and what are the services you offer?
Yeah, so as a certified symptothermal method instructor, basically what that means is that I and anyone else who has that title has been through a certification process with a FABM organization, and FABM stands for Fertility Awareness-Based Method, and they have training organizations, and typically it varies between different methods and different organizations, but that can take between, say, 6 months to 2 years, and it usually has a theory component and also a practicum component where you're working under supervision with clients. And once you've worked through those phases and you've passed your final exam, then you're considered to be a certified fertility awareness educator, depending on which type of fertility awareness-based method you chose to certify in.
Sure.
So that's I guess a basic intro to what a symptothermal method instructor is.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. Thank you. So, because that's something I think is really important for people to understand, that what certification is, what it means, and I think it's really important to know that working with someone who's certified is different to someone who is not. So what do you do with clients, basically? So you offer virtual consultations. What does that mean for the public?
Yeah, so essentially, well, what I do is, I guess I'll take it back to something I didn't quite answer, which is what is a fertility awareness-based method?
Yeah.
And that's essentially tracking your fertility biomarkers, which are outward signs that your body gives you of your internal biology. So tracking those fertility biomarkers to know when you're fertile or not fertile on any given day within the menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
And there are lots of different types of fertility awareness-based methods, but the type that I am certified to teach is the symptothermal method. Mm-hmm. And basically what that means is I teach people to chart their cervical mucus and their basal body temperature, and optionally their cervical position and openness and firmness, that sort of thing. Yeah. And then people use that information for whatever they're trying to achieve, and there's lots of different things that people achieve with this information.
Yeah, cool. And hopefully we'll delve into that a little bit more about the different reasons. So, or I guess we can start a little bit now into why someone might choose a symptothermal method. So you've just said that, so FABMs is more of an umbrella term, would that be right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah. FABMs, exactly, you're correct. It's an umbrella term, and there are a few different types of FABMs. So there is calendar only, which would be the rhythm method, where you're just counting dates on a calendar, and you use that information to basically guess when you're fertile. And then there's calculothermal, which is tracking dates on a calendar, but also measuring your temperature. And then there is cervical mucus only types of FABMs, and that involves just simply tracking cervical mucus. And then we've got symptothermal, which combines cervical mucus and basal body temperature. And then there's also another type of FABM, which is symptohormonal, and that includes tracking cervical mucus and urinary hormone metabolites. So peeing in a cup and dipping a stick in it to have a look at what your hormone levels are doing. So lots of different types. It's definitely a big umbrella term.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So as a naturopath, I work with people a lot in terms of helping them become more body aware. Body literacy is super powerful, as you know, and helping people to basically have greater cycle awareness. So what that means for me is not teaching methods like you're doing, but teaching people how to chart their cycle and all of the different symptoms that can come with that. So, you know, from day one to day one. So understanding the length of the cycle, the length of the bleed, the quality of the bleed, the color, the consistency, premenstrual symptoms, and whether they have PMS, and all these different things that give me as a health practitioner some really fantastic information about what's going on in their body, in their gut, in their liver, and their general health, not just their reproductive health. But it also gives them a lot of power as well. A lot of people feel quite empowered when they start to do this cycle awareness kind of charting. But what might be one of the signs, or that someone should, or some of the reasons someone might shift from cycle awareness charting, such that I can talk to them about, to working with someone like you to use a method? So from adding more detail, like those two biomarkers, the cervical mucus and the basal body temperature, why might someone shift that?
So there's basically three main reasons. The first one is for health reasons, so health tracking and general curiosity about your body. So like you were mentioning, there's so much that you can obviously glean when tracking those symptoms, like menstrual flow and spotting and all that kind of thing, and emotions, all that side of things. But you can really take that a step further when you start tracking with the symptothermal method, things like cervical mucus and basal body temperature. It can really take that health tracking to a completely new level. The second reason that people might decide to add on symptothermal method charting is if they are wanting to prevent pregnancy naturally. So the symptothermal method, by its nature, it allows you to know whether or not you're fertile on any given day, and this information can be used to avoid a pregnancy if you don't want to be using hormonal contraception, if you don't want to be using an intrauterine device, if you just want to head away from that side of things for a more natural approach, and it can be used as contraception. And the third reason is if you are trying for a baby, it's really highly valuable to chart your cycles with the symptothermal method, not only for accurately timing sex to conceive, but also to uncover whether there are any underlying health issues that might be at odds with a viable pregnancy. So there's a lot that you can take from the symptothermal method, depending on why you're wanting to use the method. But those are usually the three main reasons that I see people wanting to learn the method.
Yeah, amazing. And that's definitely something, one of those reasons, that middle one of contraception, that's probably what I see most in people that come through the door to my clinic, is people wanting to take a more natural approach. And when they find out that it's possible to use a method like the symptothermal method for contraception instead of using hormonal birth control or having devices implanted and things like that, it's an incredible shock, which is kind of unfortunate that maybe it's come so late in their lives and we weren't taught about this when we were young.
Totally.
Yeah, so that's really cool. So I guess before we'll get to more about learning for contraception in a moment, but something I just wanted to put out there was what is cervical mucus, or cervical fluid, some might call it? Is it normal? What should it be like? Part of charting is that it changes. What are the different kinds? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. This is one of my favorite subjects, and it's such a huge subject. So I'll just kind of give some overviews, but Sorry, there's like construction outside my house, so it might be a little bit loud. But anyway, so basically, cervical mucus is produced from your cervix. So the cervix is the lower third of your uterus. And basically it's a hydrogel. So that just means that it's a gel where the liquid component is water, and it is basically produced in response to our ovarian hormones, which are estrogen and progesterone. And sorry, it is so loud. Someone's using a jackhammer. You probably can't hear it in the it's like really, really distracting. But anyway, all that aside, so it's a fascinating substance, and the reason we actually produce cervical mucus is solely for sperm survival, essentially, because it basically allows sperm to safely navigate the vaginal environment. So our vaginas are actually quite acidic, and the cervical mucus that we produce has a very alkaline pH. So it's really similar to semen, and that means that the sperm can basically exit the semen, enter the cervical mucus, and they are within a relatively familiar environment, and they're safe from the acidity of the vagina, which if we didn't have cervical mucus, then sperm die very quickly in our acidic vaginas, so usually within about a few minutes to a few hours. So it's a fascinating substance, and it does a lot of different things, but I guess I'll go back to where we make it from. So it's made in our cervix, and basically the cervix is like a little passageway that connects the inside of the uterus with the outside world to the vagina. And lining that internal passageway, it's about 3 centimeters long. We've got lots of little pockets or branches that kind of branch off that main internal passageway, and they're known as cervical crypts. And there's a few different types, but the main ones that we talk about are the S crypts, the L crypts, and the G crypts. And each of these 3 types of crypts respond to different levels of different types of hormones. Yes. Now, if we kind of scale it back to the basics of the menstrual cycle, we have specific hormones that are dominant within different phases of the menstrual cycle. So tracking the cervical mucus that we see, the different types of it, can help us to know where we are in our menstrual cycle and what types of hormones are active on any given day. So that's hopefully a super basic overview. And then in terms of how it might change in a normal menstrual cycle, so usually after your period ends, there'll be a few dry days where there is no cervical mucus present. And then gradually, as our estrogen levels increase, what that means is it triggers the L crypts in our cervix to begin producing cervical mucus. And as estrogen levels get higher and higher, then the S crypts get triggered as well. And what we usually see is a transition. So you might see some sticky cervical mucus, and then it might become a little bit tacky or gummy, and then as the water content increases, it might become a little bit creamy or milky. And as the water content gets increasingly higher, it eventually becomes a little bit like raw egg whites, so very slippery, very watery, very stretchy. And then eventually, usually around the time of ovulation or just after ovulation, cervical mucus dries up very suddenly because our estrogen levels drop and our progesterone levels rise, and then we're usually pretty dry for the rest of our cycle until our next period. And interestingly, with the water content that I was talking about, as the water content gets higher and higher, it means that there are larger and larger gaps between each mucus molecule. And that means that it's easier for sperm to swim up through the cervix, because when the cervical mucus is quite dense, it's harder for sperm to move, although it still helps them to stay alive. So it's important that we note that all types of cervical mucus can really keep sperm alive, but some types are easier for them to move in than others.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. That was such a great overview. Thank you. So, I think it's really fascinating how the body does that. It's able to facilitate that sperm, whether it's keeping it alive or the ability for it to move into the body. That's incredible. And as well, that noting about how the changes to the quality are a response to the hormonal changes across the cycle. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think for those who might be interested in or who are charting, I guess important to note that it takes some time to understand your own cervical mucus or cervical fluid quality and quantity, and that's just about practice and habit, isn't it? Would that be right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, when you start learning the method, you'll either be learning with an instructor or reading a method manual, like a handbook. And it's always important to remember that, you're being taught what a textbook cycle looks like. And not all of us have a textbook 28-day menstrual cycle. There's, a lot of us deal with hormonal imbalances and cycle irregularities. And it's not always going to be exactly like the textbook says. And it like you say, it very much comes down to learning what's normal for you, and obviously doing that with guidance as much as possible. But yeah, it comes down to learning what's normal for you.
Yeah. So powerful to know that. And we know everyone is unique, but it's just more true than ever when you're learning something like this.
100%.
So, okay, so I guess something else I wanted to ask was about symptothermal method for contraception. So like I mentioned, a lot of my clients are looking for, if they're not using it because they want to conceive, that's another reason that you mentioned, but for contraception, so I guess the big question is it safe? Is it effective? And at the end of that question, that I guess is using an instructor, working with an instructor versus self-teaching. So what are the differences there?
Totally. So I love this question, because when people ask this, it means that they're taking it seriously and they want to know whether it is safe to use as a method of pregnancy prevention. And that is a serious question, because an unintended pregnancy can be massively disruptive to people's lives, and it can have really long-term consequences for people and families. So it's something that I think I like when people ask that, because it means they're taking it seriously. So basically, there's a few different avenues that we can talk about with this, but I'll just start off by saying that when we talk about contraceptive effectiveness estimates, we've got two different types. So we've got perfect use and we've got typical use. So perfect use is basically if you use the method or the device or the pill or whatever perfectly every single time, and you're very consistent and you don't make any mistakes. And it reflects an ideal scenario. And perfect use effectiveness estimates are always calculated in clinical trials, because you can control a clinical trial very easily. You control all the parameters of the study, and it's a very accurate figure. But typical use figures are based on, real life. So we're not all perfect. I'm certainly not. You're going to forget a pill every now and then. You might forget to do something, or you might not take your contraception or you might not use your method effectively every single time. So it reflects a real world scenario. So you've got the real world typical use scenario, and you've got the ideal scenario with the perfect use. And the typical use, so real world, those figures are usually calculated via really large population-based surveys. So it's the National Survey of Family Growth in the US that we usually get our figures from. And that's like a big survey. So you send out a survey to a bunch of different households and people tick, yes, no, I did this or that or whatever. Yeah. And the thing is that the user base of the symptothermal method is so small that it can't generate a statistically valid result. So typical use rates for the symptothermal method are unclear. And that's something it's important to know, is that typical use rates are quite unclear. However, we do have good news with the perfect use rates. So basically there was a study published in 2007 that followed users of a symptothermal double check method, which is a specific type of symptothermal method. And it was found that the method itself was up to 99.6% effective with perfect use, which is extremely encouraging for people who have a serious need to avoid a pregnancy, because it shows that in real life, these people, yes, they were in a clinical trial, but they were also real life people. There were 900 women in the study over the span of 638 menstrual cycles. So it was a huge study. It spanned, I think, either 10 to 20 years, and it happened in Germany. And those rates are fantastic. I am very confident having those rates and having that clinical study to back that up. So we know that it can be highly effective. However, I also want to mention to people that it is a very user-dependent method. So, it's not, you can't really put the responsibility in something else like an IUD or an implant or a NuvaRing. The responsibility really comes to rest with you when you're using a fertility awareness-based method. So it's something where it's important to take the learning process seriously. And I guess while we're on that topic, we actually don't have any studies of the effectiveness of a symptothermal method for anyone who is self-taught. So that study I mentioned, the big one that was released in Germany in 2007, that was based on users who were working very closely with an instructor. So what we say is that yes, an effectiveness of 99.6% is possible. It has been proven. It's published in, I think it's the Journal of Human Reproduction or something like that. However, you do need to work closely with an instructor if you want to get close to that level of effectiveness.
Yeah. Okay. So that's, some extremely important things to note there, especially because there's a spectrum, isn't there, of people. When we're talking about contraception, for someone it might be really important that they don't fall pregnant for health reasons or for, it's a life-changing event. Or, for someone else down the road, it might be, maybe they were going to do that within the next 12 months anyway. So
totally. Much grey area.
Yeah, that's right. And knowing where they're at, I guess, where you're at, understanding what it means to you to become pregnant or not, and then, taking steps to find out how you're going to learn and who you're going to learn with, if that's the case.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when I work with clients, we actually sit down and we look at a big scale. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how a pregnancy would affect your life. So, on the bottom of the scale, as a 0, that, a pregnancy would be a complete disaster. And whether that's on a medical level or a social level or family level, doesn't matter. It would be a complete disaster for you. But then you go right up to number 10 on the scale, and that's where you are desperate. Essentially, you want a baby, and you want a baby now, and you're going to do whatever it takes to get there. And whether that's, artificial reproductive technology, whatever you need to do. And so there's just this huge range. And even within that, you might be at a different level than your partner. And that means that it's that, you've got to incorporate that communication with your partner to make sure that you're both on the same page if you're going to use a fertility awareness-based method.
Yeah, that's incredible. Really valuable counselling for sure. Yeah, which is why it's nice to work with someone like you who's got a lot of experience in that. That's great. So, self-teaching, I guess we've kind of covered a bit of that, so using Instructor versus not, but what does someone do if they do want to self-teach? So maybe it's some of the barriers might be financial or other, whatever it might be. Yeah. Is it possible, and what does somebody do if they want to self-teach?
Yeah, I love this question because I'm an instructor, and I am obviously going to be biased and say, please work with an instructor to ensure the effectiveness. However, it's not financially feasible for everyone to work with an instructor. And I don't think that financial barriers should ever stand in the way of people learning how to take charge of their own health and their own cycle and saying goodbye to side effects that might not be working for them. So if you cannot afford to work with an instructor, I strongly encourage you to not let that stop you, because there's plenty of different options. So I actually have a page on my website called Selfteaching, and there's a few different steps that you want to take, but the main thing that you want to do is you need to purchase an official method manual for an organization that you feel is going to offer a method that's going to work well for your life. So if you are wanting to use a symptothermal method, I highly recommend there's an organization called Plan who teach the Plan method, and they have a handbook and a workbook that I have a link to, and you can head off to their website from my website, and go and purchase that. And then obviously taking that learning process really seriously. But I think before you decide to self-teach, it's important to kind of ask yourself some tough questions, because self-teaching, it might work totally fine for Janet down the road, who loves reading books and is passionate about learning about biology, and she's got, you know, lots of spare time and she can devote a lot of her energy to learning. And Janet probably also is very cognizant of her own abilities, and she'll see clearly if she's missing something or if part of the picture isn't clear for her, and she'll seek further help. But then you've got maybe someone else down the road, say Lisa, and Lisa, through no fault of her own, might not learn well by reading books. And that's going to be a big roadblock, because if you're going to self-teach, then you need to be learning from a method manual. And if you're not too good at learning from a book, if you just don't absorb information by looking at stuff, and it's easier for you to watch a video or listen to a podcast, then that is going to be slightly more difficult. And maybe Lisa is not, you know, she's got 3 kids and she's busy and she doesn't have as much time to devote to it, and she can't really focus all of her energy on it. And maybe she also is quite confident and she's like, I know this, it's easy, it's good, like I've got this, when really it is a very steep learning curve. And even when working with an instructor, it usually takes about 3 menstrual cycles before you've really started integrating those concepts. So a lot of it comes down to the type of person you are, the type of learning style you have, and, you know, your ability to make the time to, you know, dedicate yourself to learning. So it's not right for everyone, but in saying that, it can be totally fine for some people, but again, might not be right for other people.
Yeah, I love that. It's good to know that, you know, the mention of asking yourself some big questions and serious questions, and having lots of awareness before you just dive straight into using it as a method. For sure.
Totally.
So while we're on tools, I guess, to get started with methods, could you tell us about your maybe opinions or experiences with femtech and apps is another thing, versus maybe paper charting? So that kind of realm of, you know, there's so much out there now, and it's quite a difficult area for people to navigate sometimes because of the amount of information and tech that's available.
Totally. It's a really difficult arena to navigate if you don't know much about your fertility, because unfortunately a lot of these companies, the way they market, you know, they are successful for the sole reason that people don't know how their fertility works. So a company can tell you something and you have no idea whether it's true or not, because unfortunately sex ed in high school probably didn't equip you with the knowledge to assess whether that claim is accurate or not. So it is a tough arena to navigate. And I'm a little bit biased. So I basically get all of my clients to begin for 3 cycles paper charting. And the reason for that is because when you write things down and you're physically inputting your information onto a piece of paper by your bedside for 3 cycles, it really helps to cement that new information. And I've found that it can really bring those concepts to life. But in saying that, once we get through those first 3 cycles, a lot of my clients decide, you know, I'd like to use an app because it's more convenient for my life. And look, we live in a world where it's normal to have our phones on us all the time. And it does make charting really nice and easy and accessible for a lot of people. So I'm definitely not against apps. I think they're fantastic and they do a great job. The only thing to keep in mind, though, is that you have to treat your app like you would your paper chart. So you just treat it as a digital paper chart where you are taking your observations and you are recording them on a chart, and that's it. So a lot of those apps, they'll have predictions that they spring out at you. It's really important, if you can, to turn off those predictions in the settings of the app, because unfortunately we're not robots, and there are so many different things that can impact when we ovulate in our cycle. And most period apps, so if you're just using a basic period app tracker, most of them are offering predictions based on population averages, and they're also offering predictions based on your averages, so your past 12 cycles plus all their population data as well. And the problem with that is that there are many things that can cause you to ovulate much later than usual, and it's even possible to ovulate earlier than usual. So I don't ever recommend relying on apps. The predictions, use the app to record your data, but just don't rely on those predictions. While we are on the topic of apps, I have two that I really like. So the first one is Kindara, Kindara, and that's a fantastic app for people to chart with. And we've just recently had a new app released called the Read Your Body app. And that's a fantastic app. It was crowdfunded by the fertility awareness community, and it's specifically set up to allow so much customization, and it's just a fantastic interface and it looks amazing. So that's going to be my preferred app from now on. I'm sending everyone over to the Read Your Body app. I'm like, goodbye, Kindara, you were great while you lasted, but we're all over here now. So yeah, you can use apps. However, in saying that, there's so much femtech out there that, it might be suitable for you if you are not charting for contraception. It's just general interest. If it's just like general, just basic curiosity, then that's fine. But for actual symptothermal method charting for pregnancy prevention, contraception, it's not suitable to use things like the Oura ring or the Arbor bracelet, or there's so many different things I forget, but like there's this kind of big cloud of like fertility tracking devices. So that includes things like the Daisy or even natural cycles. So a lot of these devices are tracking your basal body temperature, and they're giving you predictions based on that. And look, that can be okay for some people if you don't have a serious need to avoid a pregnancy. If you're like, we want to get pregnant in a year, it's fine. If we become pregnant, we'd be happy. That's okay. Totally fine. Go for it. But if you are seriously wanting to avoid a pregnancy, I don't recommend it. And the reason that I say that is because your core basal body temperature rises after you've ovulated. So in the lead up to ovulation, you're taking your temperature each day, but it gives you no predictive value. So it can't predict that ovulation is approaching. And the problem with that is that we need to stop having unprotected sex at least 7 days prior to ovulation because of the lifespan of sperm. So sperm can live up to 5 to 7 days in the reproductive tract. So it's about the fact that we need to be tracking a fertility biomarker that warns us that ovulation is approaching. And your body temperature does not do that. It can confirm that ovulation has likely happened, but it can't warn you that it's approaching. So that's why I say those apps and devices, it's fine if you're not stressed about getting pregnant, but if you seriously need to avoid a pregnancy, then definitely steer clear of femtech devices.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much. I think that's so valuable to understand that information about devices. Yeah, there is no prediction. The prediction comes from you knowing your biomarkers and more of the other things that are included in the rules of methods, but definitely no device knows what's going on in your body, does it? That's just
never.
Impossible. And I definitely, if you're just using a device or an app for body awareness, very different to if you're using it for contraception or conception.
Totally.
Yeah. So I guess the last thing I want to ask is, so the more obvious ones about why someone might chart you've talked about. So whether it's for a medical reason, understanding that someone's own health, reproductive and general health, contraception, or for conception, falling pregnant. But in your experience working with people that are using these methods, specifically the symptothermal method, what have you seen to be most beneficial? What are some of the things that have really stood out for you and your clients in how this body literacy has been supportive for them?
Yeah, so huge benefits. I mean, outside of like health benefits, there is a lot of freedom that comes when you know that you don't have to rely on going to your GP to get a prescription and then go to the pharmacy and fulfill that prescription, although they're actually starting to bring out like deliveries, like you can like go online and order your pills these days. But
Wow.
I think it comes, yeah, I know. It really comes down to that freedom, in that you are now your own birth control and you don't need to rely on external devices. And this has been especially brought home to me during the current COVID situation, where for quite a long time, initially in the very initial stages of the situation, there were thousands and thousands of people who could not go to their doctor to have, their next depot injection, or to have their arm implant replaced because it was worn out and old, or their pill packet had run out, that sort of thing. There were like multiple reports in the media of women who were unable to access their contraception. And I think for me, I'm someone who likes to be really self-sufficient, and I like to be in charge of my own health, and I don't like putting it in anyone else's hands.
Yeah.
And that's really where the symptothermal method is valuable, because it puts those things in your own hands. And then, I guess this kind of benefit you would see even without practicing the symptothermal method per se, but essentially tuning into how your inner world and your emotions fluctuate throughout your cycle as well is a huge, huge benefit, because, I think we're sold this idea that we're mini men and we just have to go, go, go 24/7, like all the men around us. But when it comes down to it, we've got this monthly infradian rhythm that we work through each menstrual cycle, and we've got strengths and weaknesses in each of those 4 phases as we move through them. And charting allows you to know accurately where you are in each of those phases as you move through the menstrual cycle. So that's definitely a benefit too. But then on top of that, there's also things like the cost. For some people, it's cheaper to practice a fertility awareness-based method. Then there's side effects. So if you're not taking hormonal birth control, you can really experience your own hormones as they are in their natural state. And our hormones make up so much of who we are that it can be really nice for some people to come back to that. I know for me personally, when I was on the pill, I felt like I was living in a cloud. It was just not nice on an emotional level. I was like flatlined, and coming off of that was really nice. I felt like I woke up again.
Yeah.
So there's lots of stuff like that. And I think in addition to that, there's also benefits to people's relationships, because it comes down to communication. So it's really important, if you're going to practice the method, that you and your partner can discuss your reproductive intentions, how badly each of you do or don't want a pregnancy, and then navigate each phase of your cycle together as a team. And I think that can bring a new level of intimacy for a lot of couples who are using the method for contraception. Mm-hmm. There's so many benefits, and that hasn't even covered, the health benefits. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That's fantastic. And I guess just on that, the touching there on the health benefits, I guess for me as a naturopath, seeing someone or being able to elucidate the cycle phases, if ovulation is happening at all, and then especially the luteal phase, that phase pre-menstrual, seeing that and helping somebody understand what that means for them and their health, whether it's, like I mentioned, reproductive health or general health. But as a practitioner, knowing what's going on in that luteal phase is especially helpful for helping someone understand about their body and their hormones, and then how to sustainably look after their hormones from then on. So I think there's we could continue talking about all the different benefits.
Totally. And like when I work with clients, it's so common to see cycles where there are signs of dysfunction, and that's when I'm referring them on to people like you, because I'm not trained to diagnose anything, but at the end of the day, that chart is like a report card. So you get to the end of your cycle and you literally have a report card of how your body has been doing. And I think that in itself is highly valuable, because as I know you tell to all your clients, and basically just how the fact that the menstrual cycle is a 5th vital sign. So it's our canary in the coal mine, because reproduction is not essential to our individual survival as an individual. It's a nice add-on, but it's not a must-have. And so when our bodies are under stress, like whether it's mental or physical or emotional, sometimes our menstrual cycle is the first system to show that as dysfunction, because it begins to shut down because it's not considered essential by the body. And so, like you were saying, when we look at the cycle, first off, is ovulation even happening? Because when we ovulate, that's one of the only ways that our bodies can make large quantities of progesterone. And progesterone obviously is an amazing hormone, and it's so wonderful for anxiety and sleep and breast health and heart health and bone health. Is so much that, you know, it delivers for us. And if we're not ovulating, then that's a big red flag that our bodies are struggling. So at its very most basic level, in terms of health benefits, you know, it gives us that insight into whether our body feels safe enough to ovulate.
Yeah, I love that you've mentioned that, you know, I try to tell people that ovulation really is the main event. You know, we see the bleed, we see the period most commonly, unless there's something else going on, but that we see that and we feel it, and, you know, people even dread it, or that's the big event. But really, ovulation, regardless of whether you're trying to have kids or not, that ovulation really is the main event for your short-term and long-term health. And when people start to understand reasons for their anxiety or depression, or you know, shining a light on, giving them some understanding on that, oh, okay, so if I look after my hormones, or if I can do this with my food, or whatever, then to ovulate, then my life can change. And charting is a really nice key into that, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. So unless there's anything else that you wanted to mention, I thought maybe this is an opportunity that you could just tell us a little bit about what you've got coming up and offers that you've got in store.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, you know, we've covered a few things. We've covered plenty of ground today, but it's such a huge topic. There's so much that we could talk about, but hopefully that provides, you know, a basic overview of the symptothermal method and what it can bring, its limitations, its benefits, all that sort of thing. So, and yeah, thank you. I will let people know. So I have a chart to conceive course on my website, and it's a beautiful online course with slides and my face speaking in the corner. But it essentially is designed specifically for people who are trying to conceive, and it breaks down how to track things like cervical mucus and basal body temperature to optimize timing of sex for conception. And then we also go through lots of other things like lubricants, pregnancy tests, calculating due dates, using OPKs, ovulation predictor kits, or LH test strips. There's so much to it, but it's basically designed as a package for people who are trying to conceive. And I am currently working on a contraception course. So I have been working on this for probably well over a year now, and it's definitely a big project, but hopefully within the next 6 months that will be launching. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. I also have resource kits for health practitioners. So I know that you've had one as well. You've purchased one, Katrina.
Yep.
And they're just designed to facilitate really clear and transparent discussions between practitioners and clients in the clinical setting, because, you know, a lot of doctors don't really know that the symptothermal method even exists. So that's something that I think is important for people to have as a resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just the website fertilitycharting.com.au is packed full of a lot of free information. There's instructor directories, there's cervical mucus galleries, lots of useful articles, lots of myth-busting articles, recommended thermometers. The list goes on. There's lots and lots up there.
Yes, thank you so much actually for having those resources. I send so many people to your website because it is just so jam-packed with information that can be really helpful for people who've never heard of the method, or or methods, and if they want to get started or they're just curious. There's lots of curiosity around maybe switching from hormonal contraception to non-hormonal, such as this kind of charting. So it's really fantastic that you've got that all there for free as well. So I think that's really a wonderful thing that you do, and you obviously spend a lot of your, got such great information and education and have put a lot of energy and time into creating those resources. So that's great.
Totally. It's everything I wanted when I was Googling frantically many years ago for this information. And yeah, it's good to have it up there, because I know that it provides a hub of resources, which is super, super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, it's hopefully an overview that people have gained from, but if there's other questions coming through, or maybe there's something that we can talk in depth about again sometime in the future for another Let's Talk series. But for now, I think that'll be it from us. Thank you so much, Jessie. I really, really appreciate your time and your energy, and all that you do to educate and share this information with other people. And until next time, I guess. Thanks again.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me, Katrina. It was such a pleasure to chat.